Americans for Prosperity is committed to breaking barriers across the country, and Americans for Prosperity is growing across North Dakota. By calling on lawmakers to reduce taxes, spend less, improve health care, and provide second chances, we can empower all North Dakotans to rise. We're fighting for you. Join us today so we can make North Dakota the best state to live, work, and raise a family. Americans for Prosperity paid for this ad. Senator Kevin Cramer joins me now. And Kevin, as you come on, I want to talk to you, of course, about this scandal, this situation impacting one of the most important institutions in our country that everybody's talking about, everybody's paying attention to. And, of course, by that I mean the Houston Astros sign-stealing scandal. And wanted to, of course, get your input on that.
Do you think that's a bigger scandal, though, than Derek Jeter not getting one of the votes for the Hall of Fame? I mean, that, speaking of baseball, it's in a tailspin.
You're poking at a sensitive spot. I mean, my love of baseball started with Derek Jeter. I mean, I was 16 years old when I'd always kind of liked baseball, but like 16 is when I really started paying attention in earnest, had the attention span to sit down and watch a baseball game. It's Derek Jeter. I mean, that was the year 1996. Derek Jeter and the Yankees won their first World Series of that sort of era, and so. Yeah, I mean, do I want to say some nasty things about the one guy who didn't put Derek Jeter on his? How does Derek Jeter not belong in the Hall of Fame? Like, how do you make that case to me? I don't know.
Well, it's almost unanimous. He belongs there. Well, and I agree with you. So, but the base stealing thing is quite interesting because obviously it's ended up with some pretty wide-ranging ramifications, considering former Houston Astros coaches have ended up being managers, and it's quite widespread. But what I sort of find interesting about the whole thing, Rob, is this doesn't this happen a lot, like every day? Evidently not. But I guess nothing quite as elaborate as this. But here's the other thing about
that's kind of the thing. I mean, stealing signs. I mean, the other teams don't like it. But it's always been. I mean, they talk about it. I mean, it's right out in the open, and if your bench coach can see that the pitcher's doing a certain thing when he's going to throw a changeup, or if your guy on second base can decode what the catcher's doing and can somehow signal to the batter. I don't know that it was as effective. I mean, because first of all, being able to do it that fast and then communicate, I mean, how fast the pitcher's throwing, being able to communicate it to the batter that quickly, I just don't know how effective that ever was. What the Astros did is this wasn't players on the field or even coaches, people who were participating in the game, which everybody, I think just about everybody thinks that's all. I mean, the pitchers may not like it, and you might get a fastball in your ear for doing it, but I mean, that was all just part of the game, right? If you're loose with your signs and the other team steals them because they just see what you're doing, that's fine. When you got a staffer out in center field with a camera, and then you got another staffer sitting at a monitor and you're banging a trash can, that was cheating. It was full on cheating. It was not okay.
Not okay at all.
No. Well beyond
okay.
I
agree with you. But anyway, and baseball's such a wonderful game, and it's really an intellectual sport in many respects. And it's chess with a bat and ball. It's just wonderful game.
I did not bring you on to talk about. I did not bring you on to talk about baseball. Kelly Armstrong and I keep joking that we're going to start a baseball podcast because he's a.
You guys should do that.
He's a nut like I am.
Yes, he is.
Let's talk impeachment. It was. Sure. I actually listened to everything that Adam Schiff had to say on the Senate floor. I might be the only person in the country who did because it was long and it was a lot. He said something that just when I heard it, it just sort of, because everything, I mean, it kind of becomes like at some point it just becomes chatter in the background, and it just cut through sort of the fog of having sat and listened to it for so long. This was remarkable to me. He said, I quote, "The president's misconduct cannot be decided at the ballot box, for we cannot be assured that the vote will be fairly won." That is a remarkable thing. I mean, that's not an off the cuff thing that's some bomb that somebody's throwing on a talk radio interview or something like that. That is a somebody who's really, I mean, when we're talking about the Trump impeachment, I mean, Adam Schiff's going to be much like, Ken Starr was with Bill Clinton. I mean, it's going to be a name for a long time. And to stand at the middle to say, to be that dismissive of the will of the people was remarkable to me.
What it is it really is a complete confession of their motives in this whole process. And that was the most eloquent version of it. It's been repeated in various forms and ways since Adam said that so perfectly. But what's astounding to me is, you're right, it's not an off-the-cuff statement. In fact, to them, it's the main point of their case, which tells you how little regard they have for our republic and for the exceptionalism of our system, including, by the way, the incredible power that the chief executive has in our system. And we can argue it, by the way. I think there are a lot of good, honest people who have disagreements about the policies and whatnot. But to that point, it really does highlight the flaw in the premise of the whole impeachment deal. But it also then raises the question of how far are you willing to go to prevent the people from having their say. It's interesting, Rob. One of the things that has been talked about a bit among the Republican members of the Senate, and we talk about those that are on the bubble, the swing votes on witnesses and all that kind of becomes the sexy topic of the day. But several members who went in, thinking maybe we'd hear something new, maybe we'd hear something more compelling than we heard watching the reruns of the House impeachment process. When it really occurred to people that they are not just aiming to remove a president, but to remove a president's name from the ballot in the next election, that's been a bit of a eerie realization to some people that they hadn't spent a lot of time thinking about before.
Can he run? I mean, if he gets impeached and removed for office, can he still be on the ballot as the candidate?
He cannot.
He cannot. So that's the law.
That's the law. And so that's the impeachment law. And so to your point, not only do you rob people of the opportunity to vote for him, but you're also robbing people of the opportunity to vote against him. And, some 9-10 months, depending on when we're done with this thing, before they have that opportunity. So, I do think I even get the sense a little bit that there are some among the managers, or maybe Adam Schiff, one of them, that actually think they're going to convince some senators and get their conviction. Well, that's clearly not going to happen. And they've already now had 13 hours of debate on amendments and over 16 hours of debate on their actual case. It's not even debate. It's just their argument. The defense hasn't even had their time yet. They're 24 hours. And so the managers are over 16 hours through their case, and they've only come up with about an hour's worth of information. They've just repeated it so many times. And there's some value in repetition. We all know that as communicators. There's some value in repetition, but there's also an exhaustion in repetition, and they've gone well past the exhaustion part of it. And so you start thinking, they actually believe some of this stuff, or at least they believe that the outcome is possible. But on the other hand, it is also obvious, Rob, with their repetition, that's basically a video loop that they play several times a day, is really designed as much as anything for the MSNBC audience as it is for certainly for 100 senators.
I have always felt that elected leaders have. And I don't want to say this like I'm giving anybody a pass, because obviously in the position that I'm in, I don't give elected leaders many passes. Republican, Democrat.
No, you do not.
I don't care.
You do not. You're very consistent.
But when
take your job seriously.
But when it comes to removing them from office, saying you're not allowed to vote for this person anymore, to me that is a very, very, very high threshold. Like I need the guy to have like murdered somebody, right? I mean, I need or just flat out like on camera. Here comes France or something with a big basket of money to give the president. I mean, I need something just huge. It can't be we don't like his demeanor and the way he does things, or we don't like the way he went around this. I will tell you, I do not like the way the president of the United States handled the Ukrainian situation. I don't like that he involved Rudy Giuliani at all. I think that he had official channels available to him that he could have exploited. And he didn't, and I wish he had, and I disagree with him on that. And for me and for millions of other Americans, that could impact our votes, right? As it should, because that's our job, right? When we go to the ballot box, we're evaluating his job performance. You don't like his job performance, maybe you don't vote for him. To me, I have not yet seen anything that rises to the level of saying this guy should be removed from the office. How President Trump handled Ukraine may well cost him the election in 2020. I don't know. Mm-hmm. We'll find out in November, maybe. I guess if he's still, obviously the Senate is probably not going to vote to remove him from office. But so assuming he's on the ballot, he's probably, we'll see what happens there. But I just don't see it. And I think it's dangerous to start this sort of apparatus rolling where we're going to start saying that we could potentially remove somebody from office, not because there's just some, as the Constitution says, high crime or misdemeanor, but because we just kind of didn't like the way they went around about their business. Because I feel like that's what we're doing at this point.
Well, I think that you're exactly accurate. It's a little bit like sentencing a petty thief to the death sentence. And people fundamentally know there's an injustice in that, but it's even further exacerbated by the fact that it's the people's vote that's actually being taken away. And so the one thing in our society, in our system of exceptionalism, including, by the way, the fact that even our military is headed up by civilians, is that the power belongs to the people, and that's being robbed of them in this instance, particularly when it's this close to the election. And remembering that, there's a lot of talk about precedent, and this has never happened before this way, and this thing has never happened. Well, it's not like we've done this a lot. This is only the third impeachment of a president in our history. There have been other impeachments, but it's hard to draw a lot of, direct analogies to other impeachments than a president. But I think you're exactly right, and but this is what you can count on a lot of times, especially in my view with liberals. Although I've seen plenty of conservatives do the same thing, and that is overplay their hand. As the saying goes, killing a man, committing suicide. This is why our system is so exceptional, because the power does belong to people. And by the way, lazy democracy. I've often referred to lazy democracy. Lazy democracy is not a reason to do. To take democracy out or take the ballot away from the voter. We need to inspire the voters to be, more diligent about both their right and their responsibility.
Do you feel like there's, because the whole point of this process, and I'm tired of everybody comparing it to a judicial process or something like out of the criminal justice, because it is not. Anybody who's familiar, the United States Senate is never since its inception has it been an objective body. It's a political body, and any proceeding that takes place within its chambers is going to be inherently political. And I say that not pejoratively. Politics is the means through which we govern. It's imperfect and it's ugly, but it's sure better than the alternative. So here we are. But it is supposed to be a revealing process, right? I mean, that's what the House goes through their thing, and you have witnesses, and there's evidence and everything else, and then it comes over to the Senate, and the Senate considers those witnesses and that evidence. Has anything been revealed to you in this process? Like anything new that surprised you?
No, it really hasn't, Rob. And I paid a lot of attention. And one thing I would say about that, and to your point about the Senate not being a jury, I'm very. I hate to use the word proud, because particularly about myself, but I have to say the institution and the 100 senators, at least my 99 colleagues, have been very diligent in this. The fact that we've all sat through with very little exception. The occasional 2.5 hour, time for a break, and then the occasional getting them going to the restroom and coming back, or going to the cloakroom to get a snack and come back while you're watching it, by the way, on TV screens and in all those places. It's pretty amazing how responsible, I think. I shouldn't be amazed by it, but I just want people to know that Democrats, Republicans, all 100 have been very attentive and I think quite curious. And I'm not surprised by that necessarily, but I think a lot of people might be. But you're right. There's not one of us who would be chosen as a juror in this case if it wasn't the United States Senate and it wasn't impeachment. And I think people have to keep that in mind, that, in a jury selection, you get thrown out if you know the defendant or if you know the accuser, or if you know the victim, or if you have, if you've expressed.
In this instance, the defendant recruited you to run for the United States Senate. So
that's precisely. So, clearly it's not that, but that doesn't mean that. You notice in the swearing in, the oath, if you will, you promise or you pledge to impartial justice, and impartial justice, I think, can be provided by partisan people, if you're honest about it and you leave your mind open. So I really haven't. I haven't. Back to your question, I really haven't seen a new revelation of any type. To be honest with you, I would say maybe the one thing I would say that this has caused me to think more about, and that is that the definition of high crime and misdemeanor, the fact that it is vague. That I think I have some openness. So I know I have some openness to the idea that it doesn't have to be a technical crime. It doesn't have to be a misdemeanor. It doesn't. That the corruption by a president is not necessarily confined to something that's written in the code. However, I do agree with you that the standard, the bar, is very, very high for removal from office.
I mean, listen, if it's a technical violation or something, I'd rather that be resolved at the ballot box. If it's I'm just for elected officials, I don't care if we're talking about the weed control board in Ward County where I live, or the president of the United States. If they're accused of doing something wrong, man, I need it to be bad. I need, like, the president inviting the Canadians to invade, right? Like, just smoking gun on video. It's a silly idea, I know, but you know what I mean? Like, I need it.
Illustration.
I need it to be that, not.
Well,
and again, I say this as somebody. Do you like the way President Trump handled the thing with Ukraine? I don't. I don't think he should be removed from office over it, but I don't think he handled it well.
I don't, from this standpoint, if for no other reason, that the power of the purse, we get back to these separation of powers issues, and power of the purse in the Congress of the United States, we voted for all that. Now, I would say this, that it's not nearly as egregious as, of course, the managers have made out to be, because there was a change in Ukraine that provided an opportunity, and we've seen other changes in other countries that have where aid has been held up for weeks or months.
Sure.
Geopolitical things, and in this case, it was an election of a new president, they're unlikely to win, but who ended up winning in a landslide, and in a very corrupt country where there's a rationale for the pause, for sure, and so. But to your point, no, I'm not crazy for it. But here's the other thing, and you brought up the Giuliani thing, and I think that's something that's been uncomfortable for a lot of people, that President Trump went outside of the normal official circles, if you will. But when you watch the videotapes of the witnesses that the managers have put up, and remember, they're just showing us the stuff that they think is best. I get very uneasy by the lack of, let's just say what I consider to be the arrogance of the bureaucracy over the elected official. Again, a lot of this, you can't trust a lot of these people. And I think they've demonstrated that you can't trust them if you're Donald Trump, because they don't like his positions. They don't like his policies. They didn't think he was going to win. They've been out to get him since the beginning. I don't think that anybody can even doubt that anymore, given all the evidence that the bureaucracy has been against him. And when you get to a point where you can't trust the people around you, and especially people that are assigned to you from another agency, you hear a lot of talk, by the way, about career officials. You'll hear the managers refer to career officials a lot. They also refer to the interagency group. It's like, well, nobody elects an interagency group. Nobody elects, career officials. And the chain of command gets flipped on its head. And so Donald Trump is thinking, I'm not speaking for him, but I'm thinking I can see why he would hire a crime fighter like Rudy Giuliani, his own attorney, and give him some access. Because he doesn't trust any of these other people. But even that, all of that said, Rob, one thing you've always been consistent about, and I've always appreciated, is this issue of let things be settled at the ballot box. And you've applied that even to the courts, when you've oftentimes have said, the courts should not be the remedy for bad policy. the ballot box should be the remedy for bad policy. And so you've been consistent on that. And I'm with you. I think I'm not crazy about the way he handled it, but there's an election coming up and somebody else can weigh that in the context of everything else, because on balance, by far, Donald Trump's been a very successful president and good for North Dakota.
And I just want to go the Rudy Giuliani thing. I wish he had worked through official channels. Like even if he had to appoint Rudy Giuliani to some position within his administration, so that he's not his personal lawyer out there doing it. I wish he had done it that way instead of the way he did it. I don't really have a problem with the president withholding the funds. I realize that's kind of a debate. It's a separation of powers issue. I think in another era we called it the impoundment of funds. A lot of presidents in the past. Thomas Jefferson impounded funds. In fact, I think Thomas Jefferson wrote about how the executive branch had that authority. Thomas Jefferson, who was not. Well, at least until he was president, was not a big fan of executive power. When he was president, things changed a little bit. But, I mean, everybody did it. And then there was like I think it was the 1974 Budget Control Act. And that was during the Nixon era. And you had a very liberal Congress. And you had a lot of people who were upset about Richard Nixon. And then Congress came in and sort of took – but essentially impoundment is the executive branch saying, Congress, you appropriated the money, but we as the executive branch don't necessarily have to release it from the Treasury, because the Treasury is under the executive branch. And there's a whole constitutional debate about that, and it's one of those never-ending sort of frictions between those two branches of government, which frankly I think is one of the genius of the American system of government. We should have that friction.
I agree.
So I don't have a problem with any of that. I have a problem with it being Rudy Giuliani. It just looks a little hinky. And I'm sorry, perception is reality in politics. You didn't need to create that perception. That's always been, on this particular situation, the sticking point for me. Why Rudy Giuliani?
Yeah, and I think I don't want to make excuses for him. I mean, Rudy Giuliani's obviously a friend, New Yorker, fellow New Yorker, sort of a bare-knuckled politician himself. It's easy for me to understand their connection and their relationship, but that doesn't necessarily, relieve you of your angst about it. I completely get it, and I think it's a relevant point, and certainly the House managers have made a big issue of it. But again, I look at it all in balance and in context, and it's a long ways from removing the president from office.
Let's talk about something that's not impeachment. I'm reading a headline in the LA Times. California will be hit hard as Trump administration weakens clean water protections. I feel like North Dakota has a different view of that, because this is kind of the waters of the U.S. thing, right? I mean, this is really totally. This is really undoing something that I think. Well, one of the reasons I think it's often overlooked. People talk all the time about why rural America has turned so hard against Democrats. I think this issue, I think a lot of people have overlooked it, just how important it is in that dynamic.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I don't think there's any question. Just to put it in some context, imagine. First of all, I think it's important to remember that the waters of the U.S. There have been two previous waters of the U.S. rules that have been remanded back by the Supreme Court, and it centers around this definition of navigable waters, and it's really called Navigable Waters Protection Rule that defines the waters of the United States. And the broad definition of liberals of the waters of the United States is such that in North Dakota, literally 90% of the state's landmass would fall under the federal purview with the previous rule, the 2015 Obama rule. So when you think of 90% of North Dakota's land and mass, now you know how much of our land and how productive it is, would fall under that purview. And that doesn't mean that that there'll be a taking of all 90%, at least not on day one. But it does further erode private property rights and local control. Two things that we, in the middle of the country, care a great deal about. And that's why this broad definition of navigable water, that's why the Supreme Court twice has remanded it back. And this rule, so just to give a couple of definitions, this rule, the new rule, and by the way, I was asked earlier by a reporter, was there anything that you don't like? I'll be honest, I don't like the idea that there has to be a rule. I mean, the idea that the federal government now defines what's under their jurisdiction and what's not is sort of offensive to me in the first place, but at least this is a better definition. But under this final rule, there are just 4 clear categories of federally regulated waters as opposed to like a dozen under the previous one. But so the territorial seas and then what's called traditional navigable waters. So that includes, you and I know what navigable is. You can put a boat on it, right? So like the Missouri River, the Mississippi River, that moves commerce. Again, that's where federal jurisdiction comes into the Commerce Clause. And then there's like the perennial and other tributaries that go into those waters. And then some, the other impoundments, lakes, ponds, wetlands that are adjacent. And see, to me, that's even a little bit of a stretch, but it's far better.
The distinctions you're making, I mean, that's why I read the LA Times, because it kind of struck me where it says California will be hit hard. Mm-hmm. And my response to that is, hey, California, if you feel like there's a gap in the regulations here, you got a legislature. You got a governor. Right. You have a massive state bureaucracy. If you want to regulate this stuff, then regulate it. It's your state. Now, and there's some, I mean, obviously, if we're talking about rivers that cross or bodies of water that cross state lines, there's, California maybe can't act unilaterally there, but for the most part, within the state of California can do what California wants. So, I mean, why do we need these? I always think it's interesting where you have states asking, federal government, please come in and regulate it. And of course, the feds are always, the Commerce Clause being a perfect example, are always looking for excuses to step in and manipulate state level policy. I don't think we need that. I don't think we need. I would prefer that states. North Dakota should take care of North Dakota. There's some. Obviously, we're not on an island here. We got, we have neighbors. We belong to a union of states, and our policies need to reflect that to a degree. But we don't really need the federal government to come in and protect North Dakota's waters. North Dakotans can do that.
For sure not. For sure. And when you consider things like, an ephemeral stream, for example, an ephemeral, there's a difference between intermittent and ephemeral. Ephemeral is one that only has water if after a major rain event, and then it goes away. An intermittent stream has water sort of seasonally. There's a big difference between those two things, and same with a farm drain, or drain tiles, things that we put in to actually enhance our productivity and the health of our land and whatnot. These things are under the old waters rule would be under federal jurisdiction, and under the new one would not be. And I think that's a much better definition in terms of what you're talking about, and that is the rights of states and their elected officials and their voters through those elected officials to manage their own water that aren't true interstate waters.
Well, some of these reporters, they get their skirts up over their heads and just like, the waters are going to be well, the says the states can't step in and still do something about it if there really is a gap or there really is a problem. For crying out loud, let's calm down. Let's see. I want to hit another thing. March for Life today. As a matter of fact, I was just watching. I'm watching cable news in the background here, and I'm seeing President Trump set to address the March to Life for Life today. Is he the first president in history to do that in person?
He is the first one in history. It was either last year or the year before.
He did it by video. I think he did like a video. He was the first one to address
them. He had a group of them come to the Rose Garden. This is the first time he's actually addressing the entire group. It's the first president in history to do that.
How important is that?
It's a really big deal. What's interesting, I was visiting with my staff about it a little bit this morning. In fact, the significance of it, I think, is it's not just because of the history of it. I also think it's a reflection of how the pro-life movement, the abortion movement, maybe we can say, we went from, Roe v. Wade and then the call for abortion should be legal but rare, and it should be safe, and to now where there's an entire industry, to the point where Planned Parenthood, opted out of Title X when President Trump changed the rules for regarding abortion and their ability to take Title X funding through the Medicaid program. They opted out of it and gave up $60 million of federal dollars a year, but then just announced last week that they're going to spend $45 million on the elections to push for pro-abortion candidates. That's over $100 million flipped. And that's how big the abortion industry has become. But in that process, where many times what once were old-fashioned extreme ideas become, crazy and crazier and crazier, and then you mainstream, the corruption, if you will, in this society, the opposites happened, where actually the old-fashioned idea is becoming more the mainstream idea, and a lot of that has to do with, I think, centers around the science and the medicine and the advancements in healthcare and whatnot that have demonstrated that no, you know what, life is life, and it begins a lot sooner than than the law previously allowed. And so,
I think that's
but I also say the activism is a big part of it, Rob, and that's what we celebrate today. Once a year, it's by far the biggest annual event in Washington D.C. and gets almost no coverage from mainstream media.
I think I think you hit on a really interesting dynamic. I was looking at some polling, and American attitudes have shifted on a lot of things.
Yes.
Legalizing marijuana, for instance. I mean, like
right.
a lot of these sort of social issues, I guess I'll call them. Gay marriage is something that a lot of Americans have shifted on. Public opinion. Yep. If you look at the pro-life issue, it really hasn't. It really hasn't shifted that much. It's certainly not as much as some of these other areas. And I think part of that has to do with what you're talking about. I think as it becomes easier to prevent unwanted pregnancy, I think the case for having an abortion becomes less clear. Because if it's easier to prevent an unwanted pregnancy, and obviously you can't prevent them in all instances. I'm not saying that by any stretch of the imagination, but we have better. And this is something I don't know if you've been writing about it. Roxanne Salonen and I, a fellow columnist at Forum Communications, in fact, the previous podcast is with her, got into a little bit of a back and forth about this. I'm supportive of a program at NDSU where they're sending out condoms to students. I think great. If we can they're having sex. If you look at surveys, even back in the 1950s, most Americans were having premarital sex. So, I mean, if we're going to have sex, have condoms and prevent unwanted pregnancies and diseases and everything else also. And use birth control and have better access to birth control. I think that's probably one of the most powerful tools we have to lowering the number of abortions is let's prevent unwanted pregnancies. Do you feel the same way?
Well, sure. Although I do think that we also have to lift up the nobility of chastity and not having sex before marriage and all those things. But that's really that is the job of the culture. It's the job of the faith community. But at the end of the day, I think you're right. Let's start by preventing unwanted pregnancy, and then should we have unwanted pregnancy, let's lift up the dignity both of the parents and the child, and use the other tools that we have, and that is a whole bunch of people that would love to adopt children if they were available.
Sure.
And we just I think to your point and to your credit, having this open discussion, both where people agree and disagree, is an important part of improving it for everybody.
Last question. We're in a new year now, 2020. It's an election year, although not for you. You have a couple of cycles off now. Which, by the way, you always told me that you liked when you were in the House. You said you liked campaigning every cycle, and now you're not as a senator. You miss out. You gonna miss the campaign?
I do miss it a little bit, Rob. I do. In fact, I've become very active as a senator in my own participation in other people's campaigns. I mean, I've been encouraging candidates. Was a very early encourager and then supporter, for example, of Jason Lewis over in Minnesota getting into the Senate race. I've been encouraging a number of House candidates. By the way, I've been able to both help host some fundraisers, attend fundraisers on behalf of House friends. And the state party in Minnesota, I've been very active with them, speaking at events of theirs downtown. I've been invited to keynote their state convention. So I'm trying to use the platform I have now and the time between elections to remain active. In fact, very active with the National Republican Senate Campaign Committee, because we have to protect the Senate majority in an election year like this. First of all, to support Donald Trump should he be reelected, and probably as important, if not more important, to be a backstop should he not be reelected.
Your goals for 2020?
Yeah, so the impeachment thing has created a bit of a defensive goal, if you will, on the one hand. On the other hand, what I want to see, just as an example, my first year, I've had a very successful first year with regard to defense and National Defense Authorization Act on the appropriations side, big things that we were able to get accomplished, to the point where when it came time to review in preparation for this year's National Defense Authorization Act what we want to see done that was left off of our list, we got everything done on our list last time. So going forward, what I want to do is my biggest overriding issue, Rob, every day is to break down the bureaucracy even further. As I sit here and as I see it and as I fight it, I see more and more of a deterioration of the elected branches of government and the greater power going to the executive branch, and particularly the bureaucracy. We've made some progress on that. Certainly, Wires of the U.S. is a big part of that. So my goal is to continue to expose as many of the opportunities as we can to restore authority, power back to states and to the elected branch of government, and that covers the gamut of issues too. It's not just in Wires of the U.S. or environmental policy. It's with lots of areas. So that's pretty much my focus going forward. It has a lot of it has to do with agriculture in particular, energy to a great degree as well. But when I see the regulatory taking of people's individual rights over their own communities and their own land and their own resources, I find that about as egregious as government can get.
Well, I'll let you go. I know you got a long day of listening to more impeachment stuff ahead of you, and then the president's side. I guess the defense begins tomorrow? Is that right?
Tomorrow. That's right.
All right.
So they'll head into the weekend.
I'll let you get to it, Kevin. Thanks for your time.
All right. Thanks, Rob. Always a pleasure.